Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the 435 podcast. I'm your host, Robert McFarland. Over the next several episodes, guys, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the 2025 municipal elections. Mayors and city council members from all over Southern Utah are going to be seeking your vote in helping shape the future of our cities. So this is the place that you're going to be able to get one-on-one conversations with all the candidates to help you make the best decision for you come election season. So please make sure you like and subscribe, share it with other voters throughout Washington County, and make sure they have the information they need to make the decisions that are going to be best for us in the county. We hope you enjoy this episode and this series of episodes, guys. We'll see you out there.
From the Blue Form Media Studios, this is the 435 podcast, the pulse of Southern Utah.
Natalie Larsen.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for sitting down with me again.
It's always a great opportunity to sit down with you.
A little bit different set, a little different location.
It is.
Same feel, kind of has the same feel.
The other one was more homey. Felt like I was
was
sitting
an
in the
actual
living
home.
room. Well, I felt like I was sitting in the living room.
Yeah.
So it was a little more homey for me, but yeah.
Yeah. But you're running for St. George City Council.
Again,
rerunning.
Yes, I am.
And remind me, what was the reasoning that you ran the first time? What was kind of the impetus around that? And then how is that what's the perspective? We were talking a little bit before just about reflecting on the last 4 years and how you feel about that. But what was that first? I'm going to get into politics. I've had enough of this. I'm going to go make a difference.
Well, I'd sat on planning commission for 2 years.
Okay.
So I was seeing some things at planning commission that I thought could use some help. I thought the process was a little sluggish and slow, and I felt like I could make a difference there to try to help that process along and still be thoughtful about our community. And then there was just some various differences in what was happening in the community. I can't really put a finger on it. Just, I think the heritage and what this community was built on was maybe getting a little bit lost. In saying that, you always have to be looking forward to what's going to be best for the next generation of people. And the economy was one of them that needed to be addressed, I felt like, as well as the infrastructure of what is happening. Are we getting ahead of ourselves with development before we have the process in place?
Yeah. I got a question a little bit later about that, like prioritizing that cultural heritage and how we look down the road. But yeah, that idea that, there's some things that you could do that kind of keep us back on track. Was there a time at Planning Commission where the Planning Commission set forward and said, hey, we approve this or we don't approve this, and then they go to the city council and then it went opposite of the direction that the city Planning Commission did? Did that happen?
Yes. I can't think when I'm right off the track, but that is one thing why I was on Planning Commission, that as commissioners, we came back and said, where did we disagree with from city council, how they see this different than we did? Mm-hmm. And I know how important that was. John Willis was actually over the planning commission over that process because he was over community development, and we asked for that. And he made it happen. So we would get the report. Now at the end of every planning commission, they do come back and they say, this is how council saw this and this is how come they voted differently than that, because it is keeping the consistency. And sometimes if you go back and listen to planning commission minutes, which I do as a council member, because that's the only public hearing we have, mm-hmm. we get emails, but that public input is so important to me as a council member, that people communicate differently. Sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it's a text, sometimes it's email, but sometimes those people who passionately show up at public hearing have a different thought process that maybe I agree with as a council member and not as a planning commissioner.
Yeah.
So I think it's
so like when it would come back and the planning commission is like, well, they didn't vote the way we advised them to vote, and then you discuss why. Is that kind of when it ended up happening
at planning commission? Yes.
Yeah. And then it was because did we get something wrong or like how does that land? Just sometimes it's like, well, we give our recommendation and then they choose to go for it or against it, and we're not going to change the process that we do. Does it change how the planning commission, makes their decisions? If the city council, is there some kind of an influence there? Or
I do think there's an influence there, and I think there's an influence that Staff has. I think, and then I feel like John Willis has really driven this, holds council accountable for the decisions, because staff he holds accountable, but then council comes back or planning commission comes back and says, we don't like the way this happened. We don't understand this, or we think we should see things differently. Then that's when the change happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we see this on ridge lines where a long time ago up on Four-Master,
Mm-hmm.
you see that ridge line expanding out. Oh, how come the ridge line was held back? It is their property. We called it a no build zone. But now those lots one by one are peeling back, saying, how come and why? You can still see the house from the ridge. What is allowing us 10 more feet of our property that we're paying property tax on? How come if we match the rock, we don't make it an eyesore, we stay within city code? How come we cannot use that as a swimming pool area, a deck area, or something like that? So I think that's the learning process. Sometimes it comes back to design elements, which I feel like that's where it goes one step too far.
What does?
When we come in and say, well, we think aesthetically on these townhomes that you should add a pergola, something, some different design elements, which is more costly to the builder. So when we're driving down a road, it looks better.
Didn't the state pass a law? And I keep bringing this up, and I just need to double check exactly what the law says. But I think, didn't the state just pass a law that says the cities can't regulate design?
They can encourage it.
They can encourage it, but they can't require
No, but if you
deny or approve based off just what it looks like.
But sometimes you'll have somebody,
is that right though?
I feel like there's something that the state's really involved in a lot of things right now that I think is overreach.
So you think the state's saying that the cities can't decide, let private property, the city can't regulate what something looks like? They can't set regulations or ordinances based off of, like, if I want to build a townhome, you can't make me have a porch out front that looks this way, or requiring it to be a flat roof.
I don't think that's correct. I don't think the city should be able to do that.
Okay.
I think that comes down to the builder, the HOA, all those other things.
But the city does do that sometimes, right?
Sometimes people sitting in those seats try to make that happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but you don't think...
You can suggest it as a council member, and sometimes, to be fair, sometimes those builders come back and said, we never thought of that. That would look better. We do think aesthetically that will make our product better, and we're happy to make that change. And sometimes it's just like a discussion that you have that's not like strong on anybody. It's just coming back and saying, have you thought about this when you're driving down the road aesthetically by adding a pop out around that window, or a two-tone stucco, not having them all the same color? That wouldn't be excessively expensive, but it would make it more aesthetically pleasing to the people that live there without a big cost added onto that.
So the suggestion can be there, but it's not necessarily a requirement whether it gets approved or not, right?
Yes.
Got it. So this is really like kind of the first question that I have for you. We've talked a little bit already. What is the role, like from your perspective, what is the role of local government? Like what's the role? What is the requirement of local government? How does it operate? What's it supposed to do?
To me, it's supposed to listen as a council member, to listen and represent the people I represent. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of listening. It takes showing up at community events. Like people like, why do you go to the ribbon cutting? Because they're going to give me some feedback maybe about their neighborhood, their project, about concerns they have. And a lot of it has to do with public safety, which does not always mean police and fire. They're a critical piece of it. But when you talk about water, wastewater, and power, that's a big component of that. And then, of course, we all like to talk about traffic and roadways. Yeah.
So the role is to represent just the individual constituents that voted you in. That's how I
look at it. And then keep staff going in that direction.
Yeah.
To be that guiding force to staff we're not there 24/7. It's their full-time job. It's really a part-time job to be on city council. A lot more time than I anticipated, but
I hear that all the time. I think it's kind of a funny thing that gets said all the time. It's a part-time job. It's like, wait a minute. Set by who? Who said that it's a part-time job? It seems like everybody I talk to, unless you're in, even leads, it's a for sure full-time job. I mean, the elected officials, the mayor, the people that run leads, that's a full-time job. Like that's a small city. They don't have staff. They don't have people that can do other things. They do it full-time. So is it really a part-time job, or is it just a name? Job. It says it's a part-time job.
I think of this week, I met with a board from a group from somewhere, and really that took 2 hours to do that. The agendas and packets are typically 700 to 1,500 pages. So by the time you get that on Friday, I can spend a lot of time reading. If I'm going to go to the development, if it's a land use issue, and I'm going to sit in that neighborhood, look at that area, it takes some time.
Yeah, to do it right, it seems like it doesn't just take, 25 hours a week. It definitely doesn't seem that.
Then there's like if you're like the Dixie Days committee that I sit on, or the Sugarloaf Trail committee that I sat on, flood control, which is undersold in this community because we don't have any rain right now. But you look what happened in northern Utah a couple of years ago, all the flooding. We don't have that because we have wash and river mitigation, and it's with Santa Clara, Washington, and St. George, and how we clean those washes and rivers out so we don't get the debris. The Snow Canyon, I'm on that board because it intersects with St. George, Ivins, and Santa Clara. So there's all those other boards that you need to read up on and be a part of. Yeah. And then there's just the day in, day out things we're involved with and being with our community members. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the role, or what role does the community input, right? The input from that community, what does that play in your decision-making process? Like, how do you weigh it against your own judgment? When you're getting that input, how do you weigh what the community is saying versus your own judgment? How do you go about that process?
That's a great question, because often as a council member, you step away from your personal opinion. You can never lose what you've brought with you to the seat, but then you have to say legally what fits in that box with the ordinances we have in place. How does that work? I live off 3000 East. My family's owned that property for 40 years. We run cattle. The last 2 parcels across the street from me were just sold for 30-acre lots. Personally, do I want to see that in my neighborhood? Do I want to see more homes?
Probably not.
Probably not. Is that somebody's right to sell their property and put homes on it? Absolutely. Where is my right to continue to farm in the middle of 3000 East, And so you look at those kind of things and you just say, as a council member, I represent my residents. I have to do it within the law, and I have to make the best judgment across the board for the residents. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where it comes from. And it does come from a lot of reading, looking at code, checking with legal counsel to make sure that we get that right.
Mm-hmm. So you weigh it out 50-50? I mean, how do you
50-50 to
like
what?
your like my personal opinion on this matter is based off of, okay, what's legally allowed, what's the role within a city council member, what can I do, what I can't do. I can't infringe on somebody else's property rights, but then I have to take the account of the community on how this.
Is there a specific thing you want to talk about with that?
No, I'm just trying to think, like, how do you
because a hot topic right now is ADUs.
Okay, yeah. So like how do you look at the community input that you're getting, and then based off what you know and how you do it, like what's the process in that? Do you just set aside your own personal opinion and say, here are the facts and this is how I decide? Or is it like, hey, I have this principled belief that runs through, and the citizens that elected me trust that this principled belief is what I'm going to guide me on?
Because like ADUs we're speaking about right now as at a work meeting. So we look at that. I think it's smart growth for ADUs. The internal ADUs are already happening. There's out to DeVario. There's some of those people can't tell the difference of that and a home. Mm-hmm. But I think in planning for that, we look at the existing community, what we have, and we say, people are protected by the CC&Rs and their HOA except for what areas?
That don't have HOAs.
And or CC&Rs, where would that be?
Where would the CC&Rs be?
Where would those communities be without CC&Rs? When you look at downtown, that was way before CC&Rs and HOAs.
Yeah.
You look at the west side of town, a lot of that developed before CCNRs and HOAs.
Yeah.
So you look at that. So future planning is super easy to say, you know what, when these development goes in, we think if you're a community who thinks when you build, you should, just like a pool, have that in your plan. Say, if you're going to build an ADU, this is how big it can be. This is the size it can be. And we're going to run it just like all the utilities, just like a pool, which I believe should be on 1 meter. I don't think it should be an added expense to have an ADU at your residence. I think it will be better for utilities, for billing, that primary resident is in charge. And I'm not necessarily thinking that the primary resident has to live in the bigger home, because if you have grandparents who have a grandchild who's a newlywed and they've got 4 kids and now you're the grandparents with 2 kids, why shouldn't they be able to live in the larger home on property?
Yeah, if it's all internal though, it doesn't really.
Well, even external, even accessory dwelling units, even on the outside, why can't the grandparents live either house? Whoever
yeah, it
owns
seems
the
like
house.
they should be able to do that
But
for
that's
sure.
one of those things. So when I look at that, I think,
So
well,
in crafting the ordinance, this is one of those issues that comes up.
yeah, and what's my personal preference on it? And I have to look at downtown residents. There's a lot of infill on that growth that can happen. And so those people, the rest of the HOA is going to take care of that, or their CCNRs. So that's when I have to look at place by place. So we get in the middle of this as a council to discuss that. And the state comes in and says, we want to tell you what to do in your city.
Yeah. And what, you don't like that? That's not.
I think it goes back to, even within our city, my mother lives in a cul-de-sac and there are larger homes because they were family homes. They were just larger homes. I don't know. I'm not here. But they had multiple bedrooms, but cul-de-sac, no sidewalk. So we have to put it, and they're on larger lots, but to put an ADU, where's that other parking coming from? And some of them are the pie-shaped lots.
Mhm.
So there's really not access to the backyard. Should they be able to build an ADU back there? Absolutely. Should it be the same size as the neighbor down the street who has access to their backyard to put their driveway in and has more street parking?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you look at fire, or police or EMT to access that back unit, it's going to be a little more difficult. So I don't think the state coming down and say, this is how we think it should be. I think even in our own community, we may need to look at some different sites a little bit differently.
Yeah, each rule is a little bit different. So then the community input, like in this situation with ADUs, the community input, what's the community been saying about the ADUs? Have you gotten a whole lot of public comment from the community on it?
I think for the most part, they would like ADUs. I think my question is, does it make the property more expensive for the next buyer? Because you've increased the square footage. It was a single family home. Now it's an ADU. Now did it go from $500,000 or $600,000 to $800,000 and take that single family house off the market? So then it makes the housing problem a little bit more difficult because now the home's more expensive. Or can you offset that because now you have tried and true mortgage that says and now I'm getting $1,500 a month that I could put towards my house payment. So
yeah.
It's one of those things, but I think you have to take that all into consideration. And I think the neighborhood where you live is the most important. It's just like what's going on with I-15. If you're following that with UDOT
Mm-hmm.
and the sound walls down there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just down, they just had an open house.
You're talking about 400 on Flood Street that goes into
the
900.
freeway going, yeah. But if the freeway sound walls would go from above the university clear down to about Bluff Street.
Mm-hmm.
So who should be able to vote on that? Who should be able to say we want sound walls or not? Is that a
Who
city?
do you think?
Well, UDOT says it's the people whose backyards.
Okay. But you think that it should be
I think it should
Little
be that.
Alley?
I think it should be the people it impacts the most. So when you say who should get to vote, who has the most say, you have to look at it from a broad view to say, how does this impact my city overall?
Yeah.
When we're talking about, I don't like that sewer line going through my backyard, but for the whole city, is it the best idea that the sewer line goes through the backyard? Yeah.
Yeah. So you just have to get enough, you got to hear from enough voices and then collectively decide, okay, based off of everything that I have, I'm going to put together my best analysis.
And that's how come
to
it's
vote.
important you have city council people who are willing to listen, to show up. I think that's why open houses, ribbon cuttings, I went to all the GEO bond hearings but one. to hear how the community really felt about geobonds and parks and trails and all that. Secondly, it was an outlet for people to catch me and say, we don't like this, we don't like that, or answer me this question about that. That's the interaction when you show up.
What do you hear from the most? Like, what do you hear about? What comes up the most that sticks out to you?
A lot about traffic.
Yeah.
A lot about traffic, about how we're going to resolve that. And
I've said this on other episodes, but not everybody's going to listen to every single one. But I played the game SimCity when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And if the traffic got bad, that was the worst. That was the worst thing you could do to your city. Like, it would destroy your little block. If traffic got bad, all of a sudden it would just like all start to deteriorate and all the homes would like start to like fall apart. And you'd have to like figure out traffic. Like, traffic was the number one thing to making the game like be able to grow your city, was traffic management. So if you messed up traffic management, it was the fastest way to destroy your city, which is so funny to me because you hear about traffic here in St. George, and then I watched the mayor debate in New York City, and they're talking about traffic. They're talking about affordable housing. They're talking about, electric bikes. They're talking, it's like all of these things that we were hearing about with a, population of several million, we're hearing about here in Little St. George, which I just think is so interesting to me, is that from the video game, SimCity, to New York City, to St. George, real life, like these are all the topics and challenges that we face. I just think isn't that weird?
No, I think it's common. I think it's common. We all have the same needs. We all have the same wants, the same desires in our community.
Yeah.
So I think it's familiar, but for me, it's the accidents we're having, about being better drivers, about slowing it down, all those things. Because traffic is one thing, but traffic safety is another. We cannot have enough police officers out there on every corner. And I go back to like, should this be back in high schools? Should driver's ed be back in high schools? Because my drivers...
We're going to have robot cars like in 5 to 10 years.
But in the meantime...
Nobody's even driving.
In the meantime, we've had some pretty horrific wrecks.
They've been pretty bad.
And
some kids getting hit by cars on electric bikes lately. That makes me very sad.
Well, on 3000 and 1450 South, out for a walk one Saturday morning, one of those days it's kind of gray, looked like it wanted to rain. There was one individual in a crosswalk and one individual in a car, and they collided. And that was the only thing in the street that day.
Yeah.
And how did that happen? The guy had the green walk sign, guy turned left and ended up on the roof of a car. And it's like,
how does this happen?
How does that happen? It wasn't a busy street. It wasn't like a box truck was across the street. So people have just got to slow down and pay attention.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing, and then this is off topic of my list here of questions. I'm trying to help. I want to make sure that the voters, they're like, okay, I get what Natalie Larsen is about. But this is an interesting side topic because there's debates around bike lanes, and I know you've expressed concerns about bike lanes on certain roadways that are really busy, and is that safety? I follow this guy on Instagram, and he talks about walkable cities. Like, that's kind of like his niche. And he was talking about how designing roadways that are 50-50 pedestrian, bikes, and cars, right? So it's not just cars or predominantly cars with a little tiny bike lane. It's like, no, this is like a bike road and a car road. So it's like getting into the design element to where you train the drivers that they recognize as they drive along, whether it's through a median or whether it's through specific painted bike lanes that have certain ways to access the roads, that we can, especially in the downtown is what I'm thinking about the most. But knowing that density is going to be a continued, topic of conversation. We only have so much place that we can sprawl. And I'm not a big fan of the sprawl. I'm a fan of up zoning and allowing for redevelopment to get more dense as it gets older, right? Go more vertical. And we're not saying, France, right, with six-story buildings is the average size building, right, in the city, or in Paris. But the point being is that, can we get a little bit more thoughtful because we do have a community that does want to ride their bikes. And we don't have a public transportation that solves, somebody that can't drive a car. But I think we have a really solid community that likes to walk, that likes to bike, that likes to commute in that way. And so how do we blend those two things together? Do you think that's part of the city's role to create that? Or do you feel like that's something that isn't necessarily a big priority?
Well, I think we have 72 miles of trail in the city.
Yeah.
There's more coming on SR7. as part of our master plan to continue to add trails. I get concerned with the scooters, the e-bikes, and the bikes, and we talk about cars. They don't work well together, just like you said. And so how do we manage that when it comes to public safety?
Yeah.
Because somebody can be on a scooter and pass me because they can go 30 or 40 miles an hour and I'm turning right. They're behind me, but by the time I slow down to turn right, they're in front of me at that intersection. So for me,
and nobody's wearing a helmet.
I know
nobody's wearing a helmet. It's so crazy.
So that is a concern to me, is like, how do we make that happen and still keep people protected?
Yeah.
That's a real concern. But I know I was at the state of the county, and, you know, they just opened up that beautiful trail going up to Pine Valley. And I was standing by some Washington County sheriffs, and when they said it, they're like, we're going to be picking up bodies off that trail because that's when people wreck. They go off to that right side at this one shoulder. That's where the rollovers happen, and it's just a matter of time because people love the trails. Yeah. But I think, to me, it's like, okay, we have a bunch of marathon runners. Wouldn't it be better they're on the trail than in the road? Yeah. So I think it's just being aware, managing that, but I'm not opposed to. I think we have to be smart. I am concerned about bike lanes. I don't know how that gets managed with 3 lanes of traffic. It's concerning. Yeah. And how we get kids, because a little personal, but like, I have grandkids. They like to ride bikes. They ride with parents who understand traffic, can read how fast the car's going. Do they stop at intersections when they're riding with their kids?
I hope so.
Well, okay, if nobody's coming, the bike law say you don't have to stop. So do they stop at every intersection before they cross and say, look both ways? Yeah. There's I can tell you what, I see it all the time. People don't do that, and their kids get off with their scooter, with their bike, and think, I can just go across the street because I can. Well, you know, as an adult and I had a lot of experience driving, you look left and right, you can anticipate what a car is going to do. Little kids can't. So that's the scary part to me, when we just start saying, yeah, put it in, but just let your kids go on them. Because adults are smart. You look at these professionals who train, they can anticipate a car. They almost can read the road. But even saying that, at Ironman, I was at the catch line, and they had 2 professionals come in, make that turn at Main Street, going in front of the Tabernacle, and crashed. Really? One of them broke their clavicle, went off in a wheelchair, and the other one had blood under his helmet. It helped off. And that's professional. So even that, you know, they don't always read it right. Yeah.
So that's a challenging topic. It's tough to balance those 2 things. So when you're setting ordinances or making decisions on that, you can't help but think, okay, the worst case scenario is here. Is this making a safe community as we develop and grow? You know, making that balance. It's tough
right now
to
we're
do.
Just putting the crosswalk from City Hall over to Town Square. The question is that to the point where we just say, let's just close that road? I mean, we're going to have people going back and forth on Main Street right there with like the parking garage that the city's a partner in. And our city parking garage, is that something, or how do we get people to slow down for that? You know, the raised median's going to help a little bit. The
maybe a tunnel. Signs. Tunnels and bridges? Do we do tunnels and bridges instead?
I don't know.
You shut down a road. What's the impact of that versus the cost of doing a bridge? Or
if you have parking, the parking on Main Street's not great anyway.
Yeah.
But we have 2 parking garages now. Would it bring people to eat at Wood Ash Ride?
Are they gonna be able to park in the city hall parking garage?
Yes.
$30,000 a space?
It is. That is going to be for public use.
I found out that the spaces cost $30,000 a stall for that parking garage. That's crazy.
That's why people don't build parking garages.
Yeah, that's why governments build parking garages. That's crazy.
But ours will be open.
It will be open. Okay,
for
cool.
The public.
That's
weekends. Good. Hopefully, we can drive some more residents downtown to eat and shop.
Yeah, keep it lively down there. But they got to be careful when they're walking around.
Yes.
Gotta be careful. Look both ways. Okay, let's keep going with some of these questions. What's your perspective on the role of economic growth in a community's well-being, and how does it compare to priorities like quality of life and cultural preservation. So when you're comparing the role of economic growth in comparison to these other priorities like quality of life and cultural preservation.
I think it's a balance. I think right now we look at when I was growing up, it was mostly hospitality and construction. That's what people and the university and work for the state or the county. Now, as we have people move back to the community, you look at Intermountain with how many people it employs and what an asset is, and the university continues to grow out. Dixie Tech continues to grow our population of people who want to live here. So I think when you say quality of life, there's some quality people who have grown up here that would like to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, those work together. Did I answer your question? You need more to that?
No, I think that kind of answers it. Just quality of life, cultural preservation. You have economic growth. We try to drive business growth here, diversify the economy. How does that prioritize? What's that priority from the role of the city council and government in comparison to protecting the quality of life of the citizens and, that cultural heritage that we have, that Dixie spirit, right? That piece is that sometimes those two things come into conflict with each other.
Where do they come in conflict?
I think a funny, weird example is the name change for the college from from Dixie Tech to Utah Tech, because the idea, it was a branding thing, right? It's like, well, we're not going to attract as many. I think this was the argument, was that we're not on the map from a perspective of outside individuals. We want to grow we want to grow the university, and a name change is going to be the best way to do it, to make it more inclusive to a larger body of applicants and students coming from out of the area. So, but then there's this heritage aspect that comes into conflict with that. It's like Dixie State, that being the name, the heritage of the area, and then now we're going to change that in the name of economic growth. I think that kind of crashes into each other. Or even like a tech, having a tech boom versus, well, we used to be an agricultural community, and that's our heritage, is growing cotton and having this agricultural community. But now we're, faced with, how do we grow economically with industrial or technology-based type businesses? How do we balance those two things out? Because are we going to lose one over the other by pushing this? Are we going to lose? I just dropped my wrench. How are we going to lose? Are we going to lose the that heritage of what it was to be an agricultural farming community to this tech community that's growing? Right? Does that?
I don't think they have to conflict. I think
okay.
I think like the Junior Livestock Show, we had almost 343 exhibitors, and it's countywide, but a lot of it is right here in St. George. Yeah. So there is a lot of interest in that. I think agriculture has changed. It's still there, but I don't think they have to conflict, because most things technology improve quality of life from my perspective. I think maybe people spend too much time on their cell phones, but that's a whole different thing. You look at the Tech Ridge that I supported all the way through.
Yeah, I love it.
But I think that's a way that we have kids that grew up here who can now come back and work here.
Yeah.
And you look at I have one daughter that works remotely right now. She works for SoFi out of San Francisco as a money mover, finance. But she was able to move back from the East Coast to be able to work in St. George. So we look at those things, and she graduated from Dixie State. And those people, when she was back east, were graduated from Harvard and Yale, and nobody questioned her on the Dixie State University. So, I think it's just unfortunate that name got dragged through the mud. Yeah, the Dixie thing. That was the unfortunate part for me.
It's kind of interesting. And that was just kind of an off the head example of, how do you balance that economic growth with holding on to what we used to be, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I worked on the Sugarloaf Trail project, and Kyle Wells can take a lot of credit from the university on getting the historic designation for both the D and the Dixie. He worked hard on that. So when you say that's a university person working to preserve that, you look at that. But I was at the Tech Ridge Stair Climb Challenge, whatever, the Dragon's Tail thing that day, and I looked back at the Dixie. And I thought, isn't that the story?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that the story where those two things, and I'm grateful to be involved with, where Dixie came together with Tech Ridge.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where we bring people together. And I think that's why people are driven to live here, is they love that community spirit. You look at the civic clubs that really built this community, and they continue to do great things for our community.
Yeah, Rotary. It's crazy how the Rotary has stood the test of time, right? With those community
Elks,
yep.
Exchange Club, Lions Club.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that, and like
Leadership Dixie is a good one. It's not super old, but that's a great community project, I think, as well.
And United Way's making a comeback. So you look at that. That's really who built the community.
Yeah. Okay. Here's an interesting question. Let's see what your thought is on this. Do you believe ethical leadership requires absolute consistency in your decision making, or is it flexible? Do you have to be flexible in how you make your decisions as a leader?
Well, I think we kind of talked about this. I think you have to be flexible. You have to hear from all sides of the room. I come in with my thought process, my experience in life, but then you hear from residents, you hear from the developer, you hear from the business owner, you hear from the state, the federal government, you hear from all those, and then you make the best decision. So if you're not willing to listen to everybody, that's not any way to lead.
Yeah. I think so too. I think you're on the right track. I think it's easy these days. There's an expectation from the extremes of both political perspectives, right? Either the far left or the far right, and it's this: you have to have this absolute, razor focus belief, and any straying left or right from that is unacceptable, right? And it's like, well, nope. Now, because you're not consistent on every single, decision that you make, you're a fraud of some kind of way. I hear that the most, but I tend to lean into it's far more nuanced than absolute consistency.
Most of the time when you sit down with people, even if you don't think you're on the same page, would you not rather have a seat at that table and listen to what their concern is? Because it'll either make you more right or you have something new to learn.
Yeah.
So I think that is, sometimes people get afraid to meet with people that they think don't agree with you, but I found that most of the time there is something you can align with.
Yeah, me too. I think so too. Is it acceptable for the local government to prioritize economic growth over environmental protection? Does that make sense?
It does.
This is for my conservative Southwest Utah listeners. Like, we have a lot of challenges that we face with this. So is it acceptable to prioritize that economic growth over that environmental protection? And if so, in what cases, like what would be an example where that?
Well, I look at Graveyard Wash, and I look at the bridge going over the 1450 South George Washington extension. Mm-hmm. And it is very confusing to me how we get right to the doorstep of you can go ahead and it's, now the Army Corps of Engineers needs to come in and you need to do mitigation there. And it's like, this is 2 years process. Mm-hmm. I think by and large, I'm not speaking for people on city council because I'm not doing that, but I think we have an elected group of officials in the city, in the county, who loves the environment, who wants to not have an endangered species go out of, into extinction. At the same time, we have to keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. Back to that traffic thing. Why does it take, Graveyard Wash has been pushed off at least 2 years because of 10 feet of mitigation around it.
Currently, right now? I didn't hear that. Currently, right now, Graveyard Wash has been pushed back 2 years?
No, it
has been. Oh, okay, it has been.
But we're still waiting for the Army Corps of Engineers to decide when they're going to say it's okay. So I think you have to look at environmental impact. At the same time, environmental impact on, when you look at solar out in the desert, where's the environmental impact on that? Well, you say, though, for those people, they say, well, it's a cleaner energy, but there's environmental impact. Did they go through those same studies? I don't know that answer.
Yeah.
But there's environmental impact to everything we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So you're saying there's scenarios where, for the sake of economic growth, there's going to be an economic, an environmental impact no matter how we do. And so there's going to be cases where we just have to be thoughtful about how we do it.
I think we do have to be thoughtful, and I think we are thoughtful.
Yeah. This is my last question. What's your perspective on term limits at the local level? Do you believe we should have term limits? Would you support term limits? Or are you not in the camp of, hey, term limits really matter?
I think term limits matter. I do think they matter. I do think there is something for institutional knowledge. So I don't know how that works across the board. Like when you put the term limit on, because I would not like to see like a brand new council, like if you said hypothetically, oh, I don't even know what, say we had a county council instead of commission, and all four of them were out of, or four of the five of them were out of office, and it left one commissioner or council member there alone. Because there is something for institutional knowledge of how that got done, why it got done. You know, I think there is some balance to that. But I don't think people should be there for 4 cycles, no.
No. Yeah, so would you, if it was like, if it got brought up as a referendum vote, or if there was somebody that presented it to the city council to say, hey, we're going to vote on whether or not we should have term limits. And let's say we set it up to where it's, you know, it's staggered at some kind of rate. My thought with your argument, you know, if everybody is up for re-election all at the same time, but that could happen in an election, right? It's like, because only 3 and then 2 and then 3 and then 2. So there's always kind of a balance there, and you could have all 3 lose, but it's only, you only have a 20% chance. You have an 80% chance of winning. Did you know that already?
No.
Like right out of the gate.
No.
Incumbents win 80% of the time.
I don't take that. I just do not take that for granted. I do not. I'm working hard.
No, I get that. And I understand that, which is fair enough. But now that I brought it to your attention, you know, my thought is with that kind of a winning percentage, you know, it's very rare that incumbents end up leaving the seat based off an election. Normally they choose to leave the seat at some time or another, whether it's to move up or out or retire or whatever it might be. But yeah, so my thought would be is if it was to come about, would that be something that you would be in support of? Do you think it should happen at the state level? Do you think state representatives, governors, do you think there should be term limits for that? It's kind of crazy to me that only the president has term limits. It's just kind of crazy to me. Like all of the political offices, the president's the only one that has a term limit. I think that's kind of crazy, right?
I do. I think when I look at representatives, like state representatives, I mean, they would have to have quite a long term limit, because I feel like to be placed on a committee, to get any kind of process going back there, because it's a little chaotic, that I think that would have to be a longer term limit for me, just because they run every 2 years. Like I think 10 years for them. When I look at that, like a senator, maybe 2 terms. Yeah. But I feel like the House of Representatives, I look at what Chris Stewart started, and he was incredible to Southern Utah. And Alex, especially as a city council person, I realized that. But Representative Malloy was his right hand. So when he came into his policy and procedure, she was there. Then if we had to start with somebody else, and she got put in some pretty key positions. But on a local level, I think 3 terms is good. I think if 2 terms they're tired of you, they have the option to vote you out. Yeah. 12 years as a city council member, it's like that's a long time. 12 years in any kind of careers is a pretty good run at it. It is. And so I'm with you on. Typically, it's been interesting to hear a lot of at least the candidates have not really been in favor of term limits. A few of them have been, but I think it's an important conversation to get people thinking about what would it mean to have term limits? What would it mean to have a turnover of thoughts and ideas, and how do we move to the current, what's the current situation going on, right? Rather than be anchored in a specific perspective over a long period of time that can get influenced by lots of different groups and individuals and ideologies and things like that. Just having a, because do you really feel like, is it a very specific set of traits that it takes to be a city council member? Or is it like there's a lot of different people that could do that job? I wouldn't say the same about being a senator or a congressman,
But at the city council level, there's a pretty broad range of traits and styles of people that could sit in the seat,
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think this is kind of off topic, but on the same thing. Somebody unknowingly was talking to my husband one day and said, talking about a city issue, and said, well, it doesn't really matter. Staff's going to do what they want to do because council's going to turn over and they're just going to continue what they do. So when you start talking about term limits, then you say, well, a council member who put something in place for the reason and they know why they did it, does that change that for staff?
Yeah.
I mean, so you look at there is some institutional knowledge. You do represent the people. So there is that balance of just saying everybody's done after X amount of time. How does that change the process?
Yeah, it does. It's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that. Well, thank you for coming on.
You're the best.
I appreciate that. Where can people find out more information about you?
VoteNatalieLarsen.com. My phone is right there on the city website. Text me, email me. I'm pretty good to respond to people. Sometimes it takes me 24 hours, but I try to get back and open to all those conversations.
Awesome. And then if anybody else wants more information, you got the candidate survey done, I believe. It'll be on the website, votestg.com. Just scroll to the bottom, St. George City. You can find Natalie's picture there. Click on it. It'll have a survey. It'll have this interview here, but then you can get it, all the candidates all in one spot for mayor, city council, for Ivan, Santa Clara, St. George, Washington, and Hurricane. Go to votestg.com to find all the candidates and their information and find Natalie. Good luck in the election.
Thank you.
Primary's coming up August 12th.
Yeah, August 12th.
Ballots will be in the mail July 27th, 25th, 27th. Coming in the mail soon.
Get them back. Just get them back. Get them. Drop them off at the county building at the Washington County Post Office. I mean, Washington County Library.
Yeah, drop them off.
Drop them off. Bring them in.
Don't mail them. Drop them off. Bring them
and
in.
Make sure it gets in there. But I appreciate what you do. You bring a new excitement to the community, to voters. You're making a difference.
You know, only 13,000 people voted in the primaries in 23 in St. George. 13,000.
It's sad.
37,000 voters and only 13,000 actually put in ballots. I think we can do way better than that. So
people ask me how can I help you? And I said, get your favorite 100 friends to vote for me, to return their ballot, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Ask your neighbors, did you vote? Did you return your ballot?
Yeah.
That's the best thing people can do. And then it invigorates that conversation of who you're voting for.
Yeah.
Where are you going to go get your information? Your website's a great one. You know what I mean? Find your page. Look at that.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for being here. Good luck.
Thanks.
We'll see you out there, everybody. Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.